The morning fog sat heavy over the water as Daniel Carter steered his fishing boat through the quiet harbor. He had been fishing these waters for 30 years, but the last 2 years had been different. Everything felt empty now. His wife Margaret had died from cancer 2 years ago, and the ocean had become the only place where he could breathe without feeling the weight of her absence crushing his chest. Daniel checked his nets near the old shipping channel where he always fished. Something dark floated in the water ahead. It was too big to be driftwood and too smooth to be natural. He moved the boat closer and his weathered hands gripped the wheel tighter when he saw what it was. A coffin floated in the Atlantic Ocean. It was not like any coffin Daniel had ever seen. The wood was dark and polished to a mirror shine. Strange metal patterns covered the surface and they seemed to glow even in the dim morning light. There were no marks on it and no signs of where it came from. Daniel knew he should call the Coast Guard, but something stopped him. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the loneliness that followed him everywhere since Margaret died. He threw ropes around the coffin and pulled it onto his boat. The weight surprised him. It felt like it was made of lead or filled with stones. As he caught his breath, Daniel noticed something strange. The coffin had no damage at all. No barnacles grew on it and no water damage showed anywhere. It looked brand new even though it had been floating in the ocean. The metal patterns formed shapes that hurt his eyes when he looked at them too long. Daniel ran his fingers across the surface and the metal felt warm. It almost felt alive under his touch. He knew he should report this finding, but something deep inside told him to take it home first. Daniel loaded the coffin into his truck after he docked the boat. The drive home felt longer than usual. His small house sat on a hill overlooking the harbor. It had been their dream home once. Now it just reminded him of everything he had lost. He backed the truck into his garage and used chains to lower the coffin onto his workbench. For 3 days, Daniel just stared at it. He walked circles around it and touched the strange metal patterns. He tried to find seams or locks, but there were none. The coffin seemed to be sealed completely. Yet the longer he spent near it, the more he felt drawn to it. It was like the coffin was calling to him somehow. On the 4th night, Daniel could not sleep. He went back to the garage at 2 in the morning with a crowbar in his hand. He had to know what was inside. As he pressed the crowbar against the seal, something incredible happened. The metal patterns began to glow with blue light. Daniel dropped the crowbar and it clattered on the concrete floor. The light pulsed once and then twice. Then the coffin opened by itself. The lid rose smoothly without any sound. Cool mist poured out and spread across the floor like water. His heart hammered in his chest as he stepped closer. Inside the coffin was not a body but a sphere. It was about the size of a basketball and made of crystal that bent light in impossible ways. Inside the sphere something moved. Images flickered across its surface faster than he could follow. Daniel saw battles in space. He saw ships that looked nothing like any human spacecraft. He saw creatures that were not human. And then he saw her. Margaret. His wife appeared in the sphere. She looked younger than he remembered and she was smiling at him. But she was not alone. She stood with other people in uniforms he did not recognize. Behind them, a blue planet hung in space. It was Earth, but the continents looked slightly wrong. Daniel reached out with shaking hands. His fingers touched the crystal surface and the garage disappeared. He stood in endless white space that stretched forever in all directions. The sphere floated in front of him, but now it was the size of a person. Inside it, Margaret looked three-dimensional and real. Her voice echoed around him exactly as he remembered it. Warm and kind with that New England accent she never lost. She said his name. Daniel felt tears burn his eyes. He tried to speak, but his throat was too tight. This had to be a dream, or maybe he had finally lost his mind from grief. Margaret smiled at him through the sphere. She looked sad and happy at the same time. She told him this was real and that she needed him to listen carefully. What she was about to tell him would be hard to believe, but the future of humanity depended on him understanding. The white space changed. Suddenly, they stood on the bridge of a massive starship. Crew members worked at stations all around them. Some were human, but others were definitely not human. Through huge windows, Daniel could see the stars. Margaret explained that this was a ship called the Europa Station. It was the flagship of something called the Terran Alliance. 300 years in the future, she served as the chief medical officer on this ship. Or rather, she would serve there. Daniel shook his head. None of this made sense. Time travel was impossible. Everyone knew that. Margaret told him it was not time travel, but communication. The sphere was something called a quantum memory core. It could send information backward through time. They had discovered his time period by accident while trying to solve a crisis in their own time. The scene changed again. Now they stood on Earth, but it was ruined. Cities crumbled into dust. The sky was filled with ash and smoke. Bodies lay everywhere. Human bodies and alien bodies mixed together in death. Margaret told him this was the future they were trying to prevent. In their timeline, first contact with aliens happened in the year 2157. Humanity was not ready. People were divided and suspicious and violent. The contact led to war. By the time both sides realized they should have been friends, billions were already dead. She gestured and showed him a different Earth. This one was green and beautiful. Ships moved between the planet and space stations. Humans and aliens worked together. This was the future they were fighting for. The future where humanity was ready for contact. Daniel stared at the two different versions of Earth floating in the white space. One destroyed and one thriving. He could not understand why Margaret was showing him this. He was just a fisherman from Maine. What could he possibly do about the future of humanity? Margaret stepped closer to him inside the sphere. For a moment, he could almost feel her presence, like she was really there. She told him he was not just a fisherman. He was a man who had loved his wife so much that he spent 2 years grieving instead of moving on. He was a man who pulled strange coffins from the ocean instead of running away. He was exactly the person they needed. The sphere contained information, she explained. Technologies that did not exist yet. Knowledge about what was coming. Warnings about the mistakes humanity would make. But more than that, it contained proof. Undeniable proof that humans were not alone in the universe and that their choices mattered. Margaret told him they chose him to find the sphere because they had examined many different timelines. In every version of events, Daniel was one of the few people who could be trusted with this responsibility. He had the courage to act and the wisdom not to abuse the power the sphere represented. Daniel asked why she was the one delivering this message. Why did she appear in the sphere instead of some scientist or military officer from the future? Margaret smiled, and it broke his heart all over again. She told him she had volunteered for this mission. When the future scientists explained they could send a message back in time to save billions of lives, she had asked them to check if her husband would be alive in the past. He was. And when she learned he would be the one to find the sphere, she insisted on being the one to deliver the message. Daniel felt tears running down his face. He told her he missed her so much. Margaret said she knew. She was sorry for what she had to ask him to do next. The sphere and the knowledge it contained would make him a target. Governments would try to suppress it. Corporations would try to exploit it. Some people would call him crazy. Others would call him dangerous. His quiet life was over the moment he decided to share what he had learned. She asked him if he understood what he was agreeing to. Daniel looked at the sphere and then back at Margaret. He asked her what he needed to do. The white space dissolved and Daniel gasped. He was back in his garage. His hand was still touching the sphere. Hours had passed, but it felt like only minutes. Dawn light came through the window. The sphere pulsed with soft light, and Daniel suddenly understood things he should not know. The sphere had put information directly into his mind. He knew how the sphere itself worked. He knew instructions for building communication devices that would not be invented for decades. Most importantly, he knew exactly when and where humanity would meet its first alien visitors, 7 months from now in Antarctica, at a research station called McMurdo. But he also knew something else. In the original timeline, the aliens arrived to find humanity in chaos. Climate disasters and political upheaval and nations ready to go to war. The aliens had misunderstood humanity's fractured state as aggression. Humans had responded to the alien arrival with fear and violence. It had spiraled into war almost immediately. The sphere contained detailed information about what needed to change. Not just technology, but society itself. Humanity needed to see itself as one species instead of hundreds of competing nations. They needed to solve their problems on Earth before reaching for the stars. It was an impossible task for one man. Daniel spent the next week alone studying the information the sphere had given him. He filled notebooks with equations he barely understood. He drew diagrams of devices that should not exist. And he made copies of everything. He hid copies in different locations around town. If someone tried to silence him, the information would still survive. Then he made a decision. He would go public, but he would be careful about it. He would start with scientists who could verify and understand what he was sharing. He would use the sphere's information to prove his claims. technologies that would be undeniable. His first call was to a physicist at MIT named Patricia Monroe. Margaret had known her years ago when she worked at Boston General Hospital. They had met at a charity event, and Daniel remembered her as smart and open-minded. He told Patricia this would sound insane, but he needed her to come to Maine. He had something that would change everything humanity knew about physics and their place in the universe. There was a long pause on the phone. Patricia said she had heard about Margaret. She was sorry for his loss. She asked if he was doing okay. Daniel told her firmly that he was not crazy. He knew how this sounded. But he could prove everything. She should come see what he found. If she still thought he was delusional after that, he would get help. But if he was right, they did not have much time. Patricia arrived 3 days later. She was a tall woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes. Daniel led her to the garage where the sphere sat on a table surrounded by his notebooks. She asked if that was what he wanted to show her. It did not look like much. Daniel told her to touch it. She would understand everything. Patricia hesitated and then reached out. Her fingers touched the crystal surface and her eyes went wide. The sphere showed her the same visions it had shown Daniel, the same information downloaded directly into her mind. When she pulled her hand away, she was shaking. She whispered that the mathematics alone were revolutionary. The implications were staggering. She looked at Daniel with new respect and asked how this was possible. Daniel admitted he did not fully understand it himself, but they did not have time to question it. They had 7 months to prepare humanity for first contact. Right now, the world was not ready. Patricia pulled out her phone and then stopped. If they went public with this, there would be chaos. Panic. Every government would try to seize this technology for themselves. Daniel agreed. That was why they needed to be smart. They needed to reach out to people they trusted. Build a coalition of scientists and leaders and thinkers, people who could help guide humanity through what was coming. Over the next 2 months, Daniel and Patricia carefully expanded their circle of trust. They reached out to people who would understand the magnitude of what they had discovered. Each person was chosen carefully. Each person had to have the right combination of expertise and open-mindedness and integrity. The first person they brought in was Henry Kim. He was an astronomer who had spent 30 years searching for signs of extraterrestrial life. He worked at an observatory in California and had published dozens of papers about the possibility of alien civilizations. When Patricia called him and explained what they had found, Henry flew to Maine the next day. Daniel watched as Henry touched the sphere. The older man staggered backward after the visions ended. He sat down hard on a workbench and put his head in his hands. For 5 minutes he did not speak. Then he looked up at Daniel and Patricia with tears in his eyes. Henry said this was what he had been searching for his entire career. Proof that we were not alone. But he had never imagined it would come like this. He asked what they needed him to do. Next, they contacted Lisa Martinez. She was a former astronaut who had flown 3 missions to the International Space Station. She had connections at NASA and the respect of the aerospace community. Lisa was skeptical when Patricia first called, but she agreed to visit. After touching the sphere, she became one of their strongest advocates. They also brought in Jonathan Rivers. He was a philosophy professor who specialized in ethics. Jonathan had written books about how humanity should handle contact with alien intelligence if it ever happened. Now he had the chance to put his theories into practice. His role would be to help frame the moral implications of what they were doing. Each person who touched the sphere became a believer instantly. The information transfer was too complete and too detailed to be fake. The mathematics worked. The physics checked out. The visions were consistent across every person who experienced them. This was real. They called themselves the Advent Committee. Their mission was to prepare humanity for first contact without causing global panic. It was a delicate balance. They needed to share enough information to make people take the threat seriously, but not so much that it caused chaos. The committee met weekly in Daniel's garage. They developed plans and strategies. Henry worked on ways to verify the sphere's astronomical data. Lisa coordinated with contacts at various space agencies. Jonathan drafted frameworks for how humanity should approach first contact. Patricia worked on translating the sphere's advanced physics into concepts current scientists could understand and test. Daniel remained the keeper of the sphere. It stayed in his garage where he could protect it. He also continued to make backups of all their work. He sent encrypted files to secure servers around the world. He gave copies to lawyers with instructions to release everything if anything happened to him. 6 weeks before the projected contact date, something went wrong. A junior researcher in Henry's laboratory saw documents she was not supposed to see. She did not understand the context, but she recognized that something important was being hidden. She went to the press with what she knew. The story was vague and confused, but it was enough. Within hours, journalists descended on the observatory asking questions. Henry tried to contain the situation, but it was too late. One reporter made the connection to Patricia at MIT. Another found Lisa's name attached to the project. By the time the sun set on that terrible day, news vans surrounded Daniel's house in Maine. The quiet fishing town became a circus overnight. Reporters camped outside Daniel's property. Helicopters flew overhead. People from all over the country drove to Maine hoping to see the sphere or talk to the man who claimed to have proof of alien life. Daniel stopped answering his door. He kept the garage locked and the curtains drawn. But he knew this was only the beginning. The real problem would come when the government got involved. The military arrived on the third day. Black SUVs blocked the road to his house. Men in dark suits knocked on his door at 6 in the morning. They had badges and official-looking documents. They demanded that Daniel turn over the sphere and all related materials immediately. Daniel stood in his doorway and refused. He told them the information was too important to be hidden. Humanity deserved to know what was coming. The lead agent was a man named Gregory Walsh. He was in his 50s with gray hair and cold eyes. Walsh told Daniel he was withholding evidence vital to national security. That was a federal crime. If Daniel did not cooperate, he would be arrested. Daniel had prepared for this moment. He told Walsh to go ahead and arrest him. It would not matter. Every member of the Advent Committee had copies of the sphere's data. Files had been sent to secure servers in 14 different countries. Scientists around the world were already verifying the information. Walsh could not put this back in the box. Walsh's expression hardened. He said Daniel had no idea what he had done. If aliens were really coming, they needed time to prepare military defenses. They needed to establish protocols. Daniel had taken away their ability to respond appropriately. Daniel shook his head. He told Walsh that was exactly the wrong approach. The sphere had shown him what happened when humanity greeted the aliens with weapons. Billions died. The only way humanity survived was if they approached the visitors as potential allies instead of enemies. The standoff lasted for days. More government agencies got involved. The FBI came. The CIA sent representatives. Even the Department of Defense sent a team. They all wanted the sphere. They all threatened Daniel with various consequences if he did not comply. But Daniel held firm. He knew that the moment he gave them the sphere, it would disappear into some classified facility. The public would never know the truth. Humanity would not be prepared for what was coming. The media coverage was constant. Every news channel talked about the mysterious fisherman in Maine who claimed to have proof of alien contact. Some outlets called him a prophet. Others called him a dangerous fraud. Religious leaders appeared on television to debate whether the coming contact was divine or demonic. Stock markets around the world fluctuated wildly. Several governments declared states of emergency. The Advent Committee held an emergency meeting. They met virtually now because it was too dangerous to gather in person. Patricia suggested they needed to go public with actual proof. Not just claims, but demonstrable evidence that the sphere's information was real. Lisa agreed. She said they needed to show the world something undeniable, something that current science could not explain, but that anyone could verify. Henry proposed a demonstration. The sphere contained plans for a simple quantum communication device. It was based on principles that would not be discovered for decades. If they could build it and make it work in front of witnesses, it would prove everything. Jonathan worried about the consequences. Once they proved the sphere was real, there would be no going back. The world would change overnight. Were they ready for that responsibility? Daniel listened to them all debate. Then he made a decision. He told them they had run out of time for caution. In 6 weeks, aliens would arrive at McMurdo Station. If humanity was not ready, it would be a disaster. They needed to act now. Patricia worked day and night to build the device. She used the plans from the sphere and materials she could obtain without raising suspicion. The device was not large. It fit on a table and looked like a collection of crystals and wires and circuit boards. But according to the sphere's information, this device could communicate instantaneously across any distance using quantum entanglement. Current science said this was impossible. Information could not travel faster than light. But the sphere's plan said otherwise, and Patricia was about to prove it. She arranged for a live broadcast. Every major news network was invited. Scientists from universities around the world watched via video link. Government officials attended despite their anger at being unable to seize the sphere. The world was watching. Patricia stood in front of the cameras in a rented conference hall in Boston. Behind her sat the device. Next to her stood Henry and Lisa and Jonathan. Daniel watched from Maine via video screen. He could not risk leaving the sphere unprotected. Patricia explained what they were about to demonstrate. She showed the mathematical principles behind the device. She explained that this technology came from information contained in the sphere. She invited any physicist in the world to examine her work and find errors. There were none. Then she activated the device. A crystal at the center began to glow. Soft blue light filled the room. Patricia sent a signal through the device to a receiver she had set up in Tokyo. According to the sphere's math, the signal should arrive instantaneously. Current physics said it would take at least a fraction of a second for any signal to travel that distance. The receiver in Tokyo lit up at the exact same moment. No delay. 0 time elapsed between transmission and reception. Cameras captured it from multiple angles. Atomic clocks measured the timing. It was impossible, but it was happening. Scientists watching the broadcast went wild. Some were excited. Others were skeptical. Everyone wanted to replicate the experiment. Patricia had prepared for this. She released the complete plans for the device to the public. She encouraged everyone to build their own and test it. Within 48 hours, laboratories on 6 continents confirmed her results. The device worked exactly as described. The mathematics checked out. This was real technology based on real physics that humanity was not supposed to understand for decades. The sphere was real. The information was accurate. And if that was true, then everything else must be true too. Something was coming to Antarctica. The world changed overnight. The United Nations called an emergency session. Every member nation sent representatives. For the first time in history, they met with a single unified purpose. How should humanity prepare for first contact with an alien civilization? Religious leaders from every major faith issued a joint statement. They called for peace and understanding. They said that whatever was coming, humanity should greet it with open hearts instead of closed fists. The statement was signed by the Pope and the Dalai Lama, and the Chief Rabbi and the Grand Mufti and leaders from every major religion. Scientists scrambled to prepare instruments to document the contact. Henry coordinated a global effort to point every telescope and sensor and camera at Antarctica. They would capture this moment from every possible angle. Governments stopped fighting over the sphere. They realized they could not control the situation. The information was already public. People around the world were building devices from the sphere's plans. Scientists were testing theories that had been mere speculation just weeks ago. Instead of suppressing the knowledge, governments began cooperating in ways that had seemed impossible before. Gregory Walsh came back to Daniel's house. But this time he was alone and he did not have threats. He asked Daniel to let him see the sphere. Daniel hesitated. Walsh represented everything he had been fighting against. But something in the agent's expression made him agree. He led Walsh to the garage. Walsh stared at the sphere for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched it. Daniel watched as the visions played across the agent's face. When Walsh pulled his hand away, he looked shaken. Walsh said he understood now. He had spent his career protecting national security. He thought that meant keeping secrets and maintaining military advantage. But the sphere showed him a bigger picture. Humanity's security depended on unity, not division. He apologized for threatening Daniel. Daniel accepted the apology. He asked Walsh what would happen now. Walsh said the government was establishing a task force to coordinate humanity's response to first contact. They wanted Daniel to be part of it. Not as a prisoner or a witness, but as an advisor. He had proven himself trustworthy. More importantly, he had proven himself right. Daniel agreed on one condition. The sphere stayed with him. He would travel to Antarctica for the contact, but the sphere came with him. It was not negotiable. Walsh agreed. The next 5 weeks passed in a blur. Daniel found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. He attended meetings with world leaders. He briefed scientists on everything the sphere had shown him. He did dozens of interviews explaining what was coming and why humanity should not be afraid. The media could not get enough of his story. A simple fisherman who pulled a coffin from the ocean and changed the course of history. They called him a hero. Daniel did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man trying to keep his promise to his dead wife. Patricia and Henry and Lisa and Jonathan became celebrities in their own right. The Advent Committee was no longer a secret group meeting in a garage. They were the people who had convinced the world to believe. They advised governments and spoke at conferences and helped humanity prepare. As the date approached, scientists and diplomats and military observers from around the world traveled to Antarctica. McMurdo Station had never seen so many people. The small research base became the most important location on Earth. Daniel flew to Antarctica 2 weeks before the contact date. He brought the sphere with him in a specially designed case. Armed guards traveled with him, but they were there to protect him, not control him. The world had learned to trust the quiet fisherman from Maine. The cold in Antarctica was brutal. Daniel was not used to it, but he found a strange peace in the endless ice. It reminded him of the ocean, vast and indifferent and beautiful. He set up the sphere in a secure room at McMurdo Station. Scientists came to study it under his supervision. They scanned it and measured it and tried to understand how it worked. Daniel let them look, but he did not let anyone take it apart. The sphere had to remain intact for what was coming. Late one night, Daniel sat alone with the sphere. He touched its surface and Margaret's image appeared. She looked proud of him. She told him he had done it. He had changed the timeline. The future she came from would never exist now. A better future was taking its place. Daniel asked if she would still exist in the new timeline. If he had saved humanity but erased her, would it have been worth it? Margaret smiled. She said she would exist, but differently. She would make different choices. Live a different life. But that was okay. The billions of people who would live because of what Daniel did deserved their chance. She was happy to be erased if it meant they could exist. Daniel felt tears freeze on his cheeks. He told her he loved her. Margaret said she loved him too. She said she would always love him across every timeline and every version of reality. Some bonds could not be broken even by changing history itself. The image faded. Daniel sat in the cold room and waited for the moment that would define humanity's future. He thought about his wife and the message she had sent across time. He thought about the impossible journey that had led him here. In 3 days, the aliens would arrive. In 3 days, humanity would take its first step into a larger universe. And Daniel would be there to witness it. The temperature at McMurdo Station dropped to -30 degrees on the morning of January 15th. Daniel stood inside the heated observation dome that had been constructed specifically for this event. Around him gathered representatives from every nation on Earth. Scientists clustered around instruments. Military officers stood at attention despite having no weapons. Religious leaders prayed quietly in their various traditions. Patricia stood beside Daniel along with Henry and Lisa and Jonathan. The Advent Committee together at the moment they had worked toward for months. Outside the dome, thousands of cameras pointed at the sky. Billions of people around the world watched live broadcasts. Humanity held its breath. The sphere sat on a pedestal at the center of the dome. Daniel kept his hand on it. The sphere had been specific about the time and place. January 15th at exactly 3:47 p.m. local time. A ship would appear in the sky above McMurdo drawn by signals that Earth had been unknowingly broadcasting for decades. Daniel checked his watch. It was 3:45 p.m., 2 minutes. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. 2 years ago, he had been a grieving widower who could barely get out of bed. Now he stood at the center of the most important moment in human history. It seemed impossible. But then everything about the last few months had seemed impossible. Patricia squeezed his arm. She did not say anything, but Daniel understood. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, they had done everything they could. They had given humanity a chance. 3:46 p.m., 1 minute. Daniel felt his heart pounding. He wondered if this was how Margaret had felt on the ship in the future. Had she known about this moment? Had she watched it happen in her timeline? He wished he could ask her. Outside the dome, the ice stretched forever in all directions. The sky was clear and blue. Antarctica was beautiful in its harsh way. It seemed fitting that humanity would meet its cosmic neighbors in a place that represented both the best and worst of Earth. Beautiful and deadly. Welcoming and hostile. 3:47 p.m. The sky shimmered. It started as a ripple in the air like heat waves rising from summer pavement. But this was Antarctica in winter. There was no heat. The ripple grew larger and the air itself seemed to tear open. Light poured through the tear. Not sunlight, but something else. Something that made Daniel's eyes water to look at directly. Then the ship appeared. It was nothing like the warships from science fiction movies. It did not bristle with weapons or emit threatening sounds. The ship was beautiful. Elegant curves and flowing lines that looked more like art than engineering. It was perhaps 200 feet long and seemed to be made of a material that shifted colors as Daniel watched. Blue and silver and gold and colors he did not have names for. The ship hung motionless in the air about 500 feet above the ice. Completely silent. No roar of engines. No visible means of propulsion. It simply was. For a long moment, nothing happened. The ship floated. Humanity watched. Daniel realized he was holding his breath. Then a beam of light extended from the bottom of the ship to the ice below. It was not a spotlight or a laser, but something else entirely. Figures descended through the beam, moving slowly and deliberately. They were humanoid, but clearly not human. They were taller than humans by at least a foot. Their skin had a pale blue tint and seemed to shimmer with patterns of light that moved across their bodies like schools of fish. They had 2 arms and 2 legs and a head, but the proportions were slightly off in ways Daniel could not quite define. Their faces had 2 eyes and what might have been a nose and mouth, but again the details were alien. 3 of them descended from the ship. They wore no spacesuits or protective gear. They simply walked down through the beam of light as if it were solid ground. When they reached the ice, they stood together and looked toward the observation dome. Daniel felt like his chest might explode. This was real. This was actually happening. Alien beings stood on Earth for the first time in human history, or at least the first time humans knew about it. The lead alien stepped forward. It stopped about 50 feet from the dome, far enough to be non-threatening but close enough to be clearly visible. It stood perfectly still and waited. Inside the dome, people whispered to each other. Some were crying, others were praying. Scientists frantically checked their instruments and took measurements. But everyone was waiting for someone to make the next move. Claire Bennett stepped forward. She was the Secretary General of the United Nations. She had been chosen to speak for humanity in this moment. Claire was a diplomat from Canada who had spent her career mediating between nations. She spoke 6 languages and had negotiated peace treaties in 3 different conflicts. If anyone could represent humanity well, it was her. Claire walked to the door of the dome. 2 guards opened it for her. The freezing air rushed in immediately, but Claire did not hesitate. She stepped outside onto the ice. She walked slowly toward the aliens with her hands visible at her sides. The lead alien watched her approach. When Claire was about 20 feet away, she stopped. Daniel could see her trembling, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Linguists and diplomats from around the world had worked for weeks to prepare what she would say. They had settled on something simple and direct. Claire placed one hand over her heart and bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that was universal across human cultures. Then she spoke clearly. She welcomed them to Earth. She greeted them in peace and friendship. The alien was still for a moment. Then it raised one of its hands to its chest in a similar gesture. It bowed slightly in return. When it spoke, its mouth moved, but the sounds that came out were nothing like human language. They were musical and complex. Notes that rose and fell in patterns Daniel could not follow. But a device on the alien's chest glowed and a voice spoke in perfect English. The alien thanked them for their welcome. It said they had come far to meet humanity. Earth sang with potential, and they were honored to witness humanity's emergence into the galactic community. The words were formal but not cold. There was warmth in them, curiosity. The alien seemed genuinely happy to be here. Claire asked what they should call them. The alien's mouth made sounds, and the translator device said their species was called the Varine. They came from a world many light years distant. They had been watching Earth for a long time. They had seen humanity grow and change and develop. They had hoped humans would one day be ready to join the greater community of intelligent species. That day had come sooner than expected, but that was not a bad thing. Claire asked how they knew humanity was ready. The Varine gestured to the observation dome, to the instruments and cameras, to the diverse group of humans watching. It said humanity was ready because they had chosen to be ready, because they had overcome their divisions long enough to stand together in this moment, because they had prepared to meet the unknown with curiosity instead of fear. Daniel felt tears streaming down his face. The Varine did not know about the sphere. They did not know about the message from the future or the desperate work to change the timeline. They simply saw humanity at its best and judged them worthy. But Daniel knew the truth. Without the sphere, humanity would not have been ready. They would have been divided and afraid. They would have greeted the Varine with weapons and suspicion. The contact would have spiraled into the war that Margaret had shown him. He had changed that. He and the Advent Committee had changed everything. The billions who would have died would live. The future Margaret came from would never exist. A better future was taking its place. Patricia grabbed his hand and squeezed tight. She was crying too. So was Henry. Lisa had her arm around Jonathan, who looked like he might collapse from emotion. Outside on the ice, Claire continued talking with the Varine. They discussed next steps. The Varine would send more representatives. Humans would visit their ship. Knowledge would be exchanged. Carefully and slowly, both species would learn about each other. The galaxy was full of intelligent life, the Varine explained. Dozens of species in this region of space alone. They had formed alliances and partnerships. They shared knowledge and resources. They helped each other grow. Humanity was being invited to join them. 5 years passed after first contact. Earth changed in ways no one could have imagined. Cities grew vertically as humanity learned alien construction techniques. Diseases that had plagued humans for centuries were cured using Varine medical knowledge. Hunger became rare as advanced agricultural methods spread across the planet. The oceans cleaned themselves as new technologies removed pollution. But the biggest changes were not technological. They were social. Humanity had been forced to unite to meet the aliens. Now that unity stuck. Nations still existed, but they cooperated more than they competed. The United Nations gained real authority. Wars became unthinkable when humans had to present a unified face to the galaxy. It was not perfect. There were still problems and conflicts and people who resisted change. But overall, humanity was healthier and happier than it had ever been. The sphere's warning had saved more than just lives. It had saved humanity's soul. Daniel watched these changes from Maine. He was 63 years old now, and his hair was completely gray. He still went fishing most days. The work kept him strong, and the ocean kept him sane. Karen often came with him. She had given up her position at the university to live in Maine full-time. She said she did not miss the politics of academia. She preferred the simple life by the sea. On a warm morning in June, Daniel was checking his nets when he saw something in the water. For a moment, his heart stopped. It looked like the Coffin, the same dark shape floating in the same spot where he had found the sphere 5 years ago. But when he got closer, he saw it was just a piece of driftwood. Daniel laughed at himself. Of course, it was not another coffin. That had been a once-in-a-lifetime event, maybe a once-in-all-of-history event. Still, it made him think. The sphere sat in a museum now. The Smithsonian had built a special wing just to house it. Millions of people visited every year to see the artifact that had changed humanity's destiny. Daniel had donated it on the condition that anyone could touch it. Even though the connection to the future was gone, the sphere still contained residual information. People could learn from it. Daniel thought about visiting the museum. He had not seen the sphere in months, but then he decided against it. That part of his life was over. He had other things to focus on now. Karen was pregnant. They had found out 2 weeks ago. At their age, it was unexpected but not impossible with modern medicine. Daniel was going to be a father. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. He wondered what kind of world his child would grow up in. A world where aliens were normal, where traveling to Mars was like traveling to another country, where the problems that had plagued his generation were solved or being solved. It seemed impossible, but it was real. That evening, Daniel and Karen sat on their deck watching the sunset. A Varine ship passed overhead heading toward the spaceport that had been built in upstate New York. Daniel barely noticed anymore. Alien ships in the sky were as common as airplanes now. Karen asked what he wanted to name the baby if it was a girl. Daniel thought for a long moment. Then he said Margaret. If that was okay with Karen, Karen smiled. She said it was perfect. She knew how much Margaret had meant to him. She had never been jealous of Daniel's first wife. Karen understood that past love did not threaten present love. Daniel squeezed her hand. He felt grateful beyond words. Grateful for second chances. Grateful for the strange journey that had brought him here. Grateful that Margaret's sacrifice had made all of this possible. A few months later, the Varine announced they had discovered something interesting while studying Earth's history. They had been analyzing human DNA and found evidence of ancient contact. Apparently, aliens had visited Earth thousands of years ago. They had not interfered with human development, but they had watched from a distance. The news caused excitement among historians and anthropologists. It explained some ancient mysteries, cave paintings that showed strange beings, stories from every culture about gods descending from the sky. Maybe those had not been myths. Maybe they had been memories. Daniel found it amusing. Humanity had been so worried about first contact. They had worked so hard to prepare, but it turned out it was not even first contact. It was just first official contact. The galaxy had been watching humanity for a long time. The Vereen explained that this was common. Young species were observed from a distance until they developed space travel or were contacted by established species. It was a way of making sure species were ready before bringing them into the galactic community. Earth had been on the watch list for 10,000 years. Daniel asked a Varine diplomat if they had known about the sphere. Had they known that future humans would send information back in time? The diplomat made a gesture that Daniel had learned meant confusion or uncertainty. They said time was complicated. The Vereen did not fully understand it themselves. They knew that the future was not fixed. Multiple timelines existed simultaneously. Information could flow between them under certain conditions. The sphere was one example, but there were others. The diplomat said Daniel should be proud. Most species prepared for contact over centuries. Humanity had done it in months. That showed remarkable adaptability and courage. Humans had earned their place in the galactic community. That night Daniel dreamed about Margaret. Not the Margaret from the sphere, but his Margaret. The woman he had married 35 years ago. She was young and healthy and laughing. She told him she was proud of him. She said he had done exactly what needed to be done. When Daniel woke up, Karen was asleep beside him. Her hand rested on her pregnant belly. Outside the window, stars filled the sky. Some of those stars had planets with people on them. Some of those people might be looking at Earth right now, wondering what humans were like. Daniel felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had been given an impossible task. Save humanity from a future that had not happened yet. Change the timeline. Prevent a war that only he knew about. And somehow he had done it. Not alone. He could never have done it alone. But with help from good people and guidance from an impossible source, he had changed everything. His daughter would be born into a world of possibilities. She would grow up knowing aliens existed. She would probably travel to other planets. She might meet beings from across the galaxy. Her life would be so different from his. But some things would stay the same. She would know love and loss. She would face challenges and overcome them or fail and learn from failure. She would make choices that mattered. Because in the end, that was what life was about. Making choices and living with the consequences. Daniel had made his choice 5 years ago when he pulled a coffin from the water. He could have called the Coast Guard. He could have left it alone. But he had been curious, and that curiosity had led him on a journey that changed human history. He thought about all the small choices that had led to this moment. His decision to keep fishing after Margaret died. His choice to bring the coffin home. His trust in Patricia and the others. His courage to stand up to the government. Each small choice had built on the previous ones until they created something remarkable. The first contact lasted for 3 hours. Claire spoke with the Vereen while the world watched. Translators worked to improve communication. Scientists took measurements and collected data. By the time the Vereen returned to their ship, everyone was exhausted but exhilarated. Daniel sat in the observation dome after most people had left. The sun was setting over Antarctica, painting the ice in shades of orange and pink. Patricia sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Patricia said they had done it. They had actually changed the future. Daniel nodded. He felt hollow inside. Not sad exactly, but not happy either. He had spent months working toward this moment. Now that it was here, he did not know what to feel. Patricia asked if he was okay. Daniel said he did not know. Everything he had done had been for Margaret, to honor her message, to save the future she had warned him about. But now the future was different. The Margaret he had spoken to in the sphere would never exist. In the new timeline, his wife would make different choices. Live a different life. She might not even become a doctor. She might never end up on the Europa station. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said that maybe that was the point. Daniel had loved Margaret so much that he was willing to erase the version of her that had sent him the message. That took a special kind of courage. It meant he cared more about saving lives than keeping the memory of his wife exactly as it was. Daniel supposed that was true. Margaret would have wanted him to save people. That was who she was in every timeline. The Varine returned the next day with more of their people. They brought gifts, technologies that would help humanity solve problems, clean energy systems, medical advances, agricultural techniques that could feed billions. They did not give humans weapons or dangerous knowledge. They gave tools for building a better world. In exchange, humans shared their own gifts, music and art and literature. The Varine were fascinated by human creativity. They said humans had a unique way of seeing the universe. Fresh perspectives that could teach the older species new ways of thinking. Over the next months, a relationship developed. Varine scientists came to Earth and human scientists visited the Varine ship. Claire Bennett led negotiations for humanity while the Varine sent diplomats of their own. Progress was slow but steady. Both sides were careful not to move too fast. Daniel remained involved but took a step back from the spotlight. He did not want to be famous. He just wanted to know that humanity would be okay. The Advent Committee stayed together as advisors, but they let others take the lead on actual diplomacy and science. 6 months after first contact, Daniel returned to Maine. His house felt strange after so long away. Everything was exactly as he had left it, but nothing felt the same. The world had changed. He had changed. He went to the garage where the sphere still sat on its pedestal. He touched the surface and waited for Margaret's image to appear. When it did, she looked different somehow, faded. Margaret told him this was probably the last time they would speak. The timeline had changed enough that the connection was breaking down. The future she came from was being erased bit by bit. Daniel asked if she was afraid. Margaret said no. She was happy. She had accomplished what she set out to do. Billions of people would live because of the information she sent back. That was worth any cost. She asked Daniel to promise her something. Daniel said he would promise anything. Margaret asked him to live, really live. She said he had spent 2 years grieving, and then months saving the world. Now it was time to take care of himself, find happiness again, let himself love again if the right person came along. She wanted him to have a full life, not just an important one. Daniel felt tears on his face. He said he did not know if he could love anyone else. Margaret smiled. She said he would not be replacing her. Love did not work that way. The heart had infinite capacity. Loving someone new would not diminish what they had shared. She would always be his first love. But she did not want to be his only love. The image flickered. Margaret was fading. She said goodbye. She said she loved him across all time and space and reality. She thanked him for being brave enough to change everything. Then she was gone. The sphere went dark. It was just a crystal ball now, beautiful but empty. The connection to the future had been severed. Daniel sat in the garage for a long time. He felt like he had lost Margaret all over again. But this time it was different. This time he knew she had died for a reason. She had saved humanity. That was a legacy anyone would be proud of. Over. The next year, humanity continued to grow closer with the Varine. More alien species made contact. The galaxy turned out to be full of civilizations eager to meet the newest species. Humans learned faster than anyone expected. Within 2 years, there were human colonies on Mars and stations orbiting Europa. The sphere's information had given humanity a technological head start. Daniel watched it all happen from his small house in Maine. He went back to fishing. The ocean was still his sanctuary. But now when he looked at the stars, he knew what was out there. He knew humanity had a place among them. Patricia visited him sometimes. So did Henry and Lisa and Jonathan. They remained friends even though their mission was complete. They shared a bond that few people could understand. They had changed the world together. One day Patricia brought someone with her, a woman named Karen Wright who was a marine biologist. She was studying how alien organisms might adapt to Earth's oceans. Patricia thought Daniel and Karen might have things to talk about since they both worked with the sea. Karen was kind and intelligent. She had a quick laugh and honest eyes. She asked Daniel about his fishing and actually listened to his answers. They talked for hours about the ocean and life and the strange turn the world had taken. When Karen left, she asked if she could visit again. Daniel surprised himself by saying yes. Over the next months, Karen became a regular visitor. She and Daniel took his boat out to study marine life. They discussed the changes happening to Earth's ecosystem as alien knowledge spread. They cooked dinners together and watched sunsets over the harbor. Daniel realized he was happy. Not the same happiness he had shared with Margaret, but a new kind of happiness. He felt guilty at first. It seemed wrong to move on. But he remembered Margaret's words. She had wanted him to live fully. Loving Karen did not erase what he had shared with Margaret. It honored it by proving that love was worth the pain of loss. 2 years after first contact, Daniel and Karen were married. It was a small ceremony on the beach. Patricia and Henry and Lisa and Jonathan attended. So did Claire Bennett, who had become a friend. Even some Vereen diplomats came to observe human bonding rituals. Daniel thought about Margaret during the ceremony. He wondered what she was doing in the new timeline. Maybe she was happy too. Maybe she had found love with someone else. Maybe she was still becoming a doctor. Or maybe she had chosen a completely different path. He would never know. But that was okay. That night, Daniel stood on his deck looking at the stars. Karen came out and put her arm around him. She asked what he was thinking about. Daniel said he was thinking about how strange life was. How one small choice could change everything. How pulling a coffin from the ocean had led to humanity joining the galactic community. How loss and love and hope were all connected in ways he could barely understand. Karen kissed his cheek. She said that was too philosophical for her. She just knew she was glad he had pulled that coffin from the water. Otherwise, they might never have met. Daniel laughed. She was right. Everything was connected. Every choice mattered. Margaret had sent that message because she knew Daniel would make the right choices. 20 years passed like water flowing through Daniel's fingers. His daughter Margaret grew up strong and curious. She had Karen's smile and Daniel's love of the ocean. By age 10, she was already talking about becoming an astronaut. By 15, she was studying alien languages and xenobiology. By 18, she was accepted into the first joint human Vereen university program on Mars. Daniel was 70, 8 years old when Margaret left for Mars. He stood at the spaceport with Karen, watching their daughter board the shuttle. She looked so small climbing those steps, but she turned and waved with complete confidence. She was ready for this adventure, Karen cried. Daniel held her hand and tried not to cry himself. Their little girl was going to another planet. It still seemed impossible, even though it was completely normal now. Thousands of humans lived and worked throughout the solar system. Earth was just the beginning. The shuttle lifted off silently using gravity technology the Vereen had shared. Within seconds, it was out of sight. Margaret was gone, on her way to a new life on a new world. Daniel and Karen drove home in silence. The house felt empty without Margaret's energy filling it. Daniel went out to the deck and looked at the stars. Mars was up there somewhere. His daughter was heading toward it right now. He thought about the other Margaret, his first wife, the woman who had sent him the message from the future. In the original timeline, she had become a doctor on a starship. In this timeline, she had never existed in that form. The Europa station was never built because it was not needed. The war never happened because Daniel had prevented it. Sometimes Daniel wondered about her. In this new timeline, there was a Margaret Carter who had lived and died from cancer. But was she the same person? Did she have the same soul? Or was she someone completely different because the timeline had changed? There was no way to know. The sphere had gone dark years ago. The connection to the future was severed. Daniel would never speak to Margaret's image again. But maybe that was okay. He had new memories now. 20 years with Karen, 18 years raising their daughter. Watching humanity grow and change and become something better than it had been. Those memories were real and solid in his. A month after Margaret left for Mars, Daniel got a call from Claire Bennett. She was retired now, but still involved in galactic diplomacy. She asked if Daniel would be willing to speak at a conference. The Galactic Council was gathering on Earth for the first time. Delegates from 47 different species would attend. Claire thought it would be meaningful if Daniel told his story. Daniel hesitated. He was old and tired. He had told his story 1,000 times over the years. What more was there to say? Claire said the galaxy needed to hear it again. New species were joining the council all the time. They needed to understand what humanity had overcome, how one person had changed the course of history. It was important. Daniel agreed. For Claire, he would do it. The conference was held in Geneva. Daniel flew there with Karen. It was strange being in a city again. They lived such a quiet life in Maine. Geneva was overwhelming with its crowds and noise and constant activity. The conference hall was enormous. Representatives from dozens of species filled the seats. Daniel saw Vereen and also species he had never encountered. Some were humanoid. Others were radically different. One species seemed to be made of light. Another looked like living crystal. The diversity was staggering. Claire introduced Daniel. She gave a brief summary of his role in preparing humanity for first contact. Then she invited him to speak. Daniel walked to the podium slowly. His legs were not what they used to be. He looked out at the assembled delegates and felt suddenly small. What could he say to beings from across the galaxy? What did his small story matter in the grand scheme of things? Then he saw Karen in the front row. She smiled at him. That gave him courage. Daniel told his story simply. He talked about losing Margaret to cancer, about the coffin floating in the ocean, about the sphere and the message from the future. He explained how he and a small group of people had worked to prepare humanity for contact, how they had overcome fear and division to present a united front. He talked about the choices that had mattered. His choice to open the coffin, his choice to trust Patricia, his choice to go public with the information. Each small decision had built on the previous ones until they created something larger than he could have imagined. Daniel said he was not special. He was just a fisherman who had been in the right place at the right time. Anyone could have done what he did if they had been given the same chance. The lesson was not that Daniel was remarkable. The lesson was that everyone had the power to change things. Every choice mattered. Every person had value. When he finished speaking, there was silence. Then the hall erupted in sounds. Some species clapped, others made musical tones. The crystalline beings chimed like bells. It was the galactic equivalent of applause. A Vereen delegate stood to speak. It said humanity had taught the galaxy an important lesson. They had shown that it was possible to change destiny, that the future was not fixed, that courage and wisdom could overcome any obstacle. Humanity's rapid rise from isolated species to galactic citizens was unprecedented. Other species had taken centuries to make the same journey. Humans had done it in 2 decades. Another delegate from a species Daniel did not recognize spoke next. It said humans had a unique quality. They were adaptable and creative and willing to take risks. But more than that, they had hope. Even in the darkest moments, humans believed things could get better. That hope had saved them. The conference continued for 3 days. Daniel attended some sessions, but mostly he and Karen explored Geneva. They visited museums and walked through parks. They ate at restaurants serving food from a dozen different worlds. It was strange and wonderful. On the last night, Claire hosted a small dinner for Daniel and Karen. Patricia was there. So were Henry and Lisa and Jonathan. The Advent Committee together again after all these years. They were all old now. Henry had trouble walking. Lisa had lost most of her hearing. Jonathan's hands shook from age. But their minds were still sharp and their friendship was still strong. They reminisced about the early days, the secret meetings in Daniel's garage, the fear and excitement of discovering the sphere, the desperate work to prepare humanity for contact. It seemed like a lifetime ago. It was a lifetime ago. Patricia raised her glass in a toast. She said they had accomplished something extraordinary. They had saved billions of lives, changed the course of human history, ensured humanity's survival and prosperity. They should be proud. Daniel raised his glass, but he felt conflicted. He was proud of what they had done, but he also felt the weight of it. The knowledge that in another timeline billions had died. The reality that Margaret had erased herself to save them. The understanding that his actions had consequences beyond anything he could fully grasp. After dinner, Daniel and Karen walked along the lake. The water was calm and reflected the lights of the city. Daniel thought about the ocean in Maine. about his fishing boat and the simple life he had left behind to come here. Karen asked what he was thinking. Daniel said he was thinking about endings. His life was coming to an end. He was 78 years old. He had maybe 10 or 15 years left if he was lucky. He had accomplished more than most people could dream of. But he felt tired. Karen took his hand. She said everyone gets tired eventually. That was part of being alive. But he should not focus on endings. He should focus on the continuation. Their daughter was out there exploring Mars. She would have children someday. Those children would spread across the galaxy. Daniel's legacy would continue long after he was gone. Daniel smiled. She was right. Life was not about one person. It was about the chain of lives that stretched backward into the past and forward into the future. He was just one link in that chain, but he had made sure the chain did not break. They flew back to Maine the next day. Daniel was happy to be home. The ocean greeted him like an old friend. He went fishing the morning after they returned. The water was calm and the sky was clear. It was a perfect day. As Daniel checked his nets, he thought about everything that had happened. The impossible journey from grief to hope, from isolation to connection, from one small man to a pivotal figure in human history. It had been worth it, all of it. The fear and the struggle and the sacrifice. It had been worth it to save humanity. Years later, when Daniel was 85 years old and his body was failing, he received a message from Mars. His daughter Margaret had given birth to twins, a boy and a girl. She named the girl Claire after Claire Bennett. She named the boy Henry after Henry Kim. But she asked Daniel what name he thought she should use for their family name. She wanted to honor both her parents. Daniel told her to use Wright, Karen's family name. It was only fair. Karen had given up so much to be with him. She deserved to have her name carried forward. But Margaret insisted. She said the name Carter had meaning now. It represented courage and change and hope. She wanted her children to carry that legacy. Daniel did not argue. He was too tired to argue. He told her he loved her and was proud of her. Then he ended the call. Karen found him on the deck looking at the stars. She sat beside him and they held hands in comfortable silence.